The story begins by introducing our protagonist, Damon, a kind of assassin at the service of this guy here, Javier, the head of a very important family, and which was congratulating him for the good work he had done so far. As the leader of the Shadow Clan, a kind of organization made up of assassins, at the service of his family, although after his words he asked if he thought a shadow needed freedom, to which the boy replied that no, the shadows were only made to follow orders. However, the guy asked him then, why the hell had he acted on his own, and how he had been able to get rid of brainwashing, exercising enormous pressure on the boy. The protagonist could not understand how that guy had discovered it, explaining to us that brainwashing was a method with which Javier's family controlled the organization of assassins. First, he captured orphans like him and made them work as mercenaries all their lives. In other words, he prepared those children as dogs loyal to his family, although luckily the latter was able to escape control. However, he did not understand how he had been discovered, to which Javier explained that in reality all the assassins, in addition to brainwashing, had another padlock on their bodies, thanks to which he was able to put Damon on his knees, exercising an unbearable pain in his body, and which according to Javier was caused by a worm that was embedded in his heart, and that had the function of destroying it in case the slaves disobeyed the orders. In other words, Damon was screwed, since he had no way to escape a spell like that. So he remembered a little of his past, about how he was kidnapped at an early age and raised like a house dog, although he happened to learn a fire technique, thanks to which he had been able to escape brainwashing. It was then when he thought he could dream of freedom, but now he realized that that was impossible, wondering what the hell he had done to deserve that. But if that was his end, he could not let it be so pathetic. So at least he would try to take with him the arm of his teacher. Javier did not understand how he was able to stand in that state. After this, the boy, blinded by anger, he resorted to him. But despite the fact that he attacked with all his power, he was not able to do anything against Javier, who quickly caused him a fatal wound that, yes, at least he was able to cause a small scratch on the hand of his master, who did not remember when it had been the last time he was hurt. Meanwhile, demons that little by little lost the light in his eyes began to accept that there was nothing he could do. After all, the power gap was huge, but despite understanding it, the anger continued to flood him. He could not accept the miserable life he had had, and much less having been a simple tool. So with his last strength, he began to pray God, a demon, someone would allow him to have an opportunity to take revenge. After this, a bright aura began to envelop him. You have been chosen by fury. You will possess your body. Error, error. After this, they show us a little boy, protected by his mother, who, yes, apparently was our protag, who was now a newborn baby, and he could not understand how he had reincarnated in the son of that woman, explaining to us that he woke up in that body with all the memories of his past life. At first he thought it was a dream, until after a few days he understood what was happening. That was his new body. He could not understand well how it had happened. However, he realized that now he was in a fairly comfortable house, which was perhaps from a renowned family, something that could be useful to carry out his revenge. So for the moment he wondered what type of family belonged to that mansion. Doubt that was resolved after meeting the patriarch of the family, and therefore his grandfather, who had an overwhelming presence. Just by seeing him, Damon was able to recognize who he was. The guy was the king of the annihilation, Cedric Sigurd, one of the most powerful warriors, and now he understood that he had reincarnated in one of the most powerful families. His grandfather gave him the name of Lawn, which in his language meant shadow. In other words, his title as a shadow continued to accompany him. On the other hand, the boy took advantage of his moments alone to practice his old technique, with which he had been able to free himself from mental control, the Ring of Fire, a fairly powerful technique that, according to him, he was not able to perfect in his past life. But now it was the perfect opportunity to do it, since he was sure that with it he would have enough power to take revenge on Javier, although it was not so easy, since his new body was full of ice energy, which contrasted with that of fire. In addition to analyzing his magic circuit a little, he realized that if more points in it were blocked by the ice, he could lose his life. Luckily, he could use his fire skill to avoid it, but he did not want to waste the ice energy that could be useful in case of dominating her. So he would not eliminate her completely, although the training to achieve it was turning out to be more difficult than I expected. And not only that, since pretending to be a common and ordinary baby with his mother having the mind of an adult was a real torture for him. But leaving that aside, Sylvia, the boy's mother, was visited by one of his old friends. That old man was the Saint of the Rags, a person recognized for having medical techniques and skills that were recognized in almost everyone. and which had a relationship quite close to his mother. So after meeting him, he used his magic to check his health, but when doing it he realized that the condition of the proto was not very good, explaining to his mother that Damon had a kind of curse, this since his mana circuit was being blocked by ice energy, telling him that if he did not treat him, he would lose his life. After that, the old man retired to visit his old friend Cedric, and after hearing his words, Damon understood that it was the energy that he had felt. Even so, he would try to get the most out of it. However, his mother, who did not know anything about this, was devastated, believing that perhaps she could lose her son. Even so, he would do everything possible to avoid it, while Damon, who watched him crying, began to feel a pressure on his chest, a feeling that his old self had never felt. Because of that, he tried to comfort her. Although he could not express his words well, only the phrase "mom," a word that impacted Sylvia too much, to the extent of breaking into the room where her father was meeting with the old man, to beg him to please save Damon's life. Although the guy replied that he did not have to help, someone who perhaps could not contribute to his family, he had even done too much by giving the last name Sigurd to someone who probably could not become a martial artist. After this, the fruit son asked his guards to get her out of the room. Once this was done, the old man asked him why they were not this with his daughter, if it had been him who sent us to call him to check on his grandson. But hey, after this he explained the details of Damon's curse. 9 of his mana circuits were blocked by ice energy, and in case they all blocked, he would lose his life. Luckily, giving him the right medicine, he could save himself. That yes, it was almost impossible for him to become a martial artist, due to his condition, something that seemed to affect Cedric, but he was content that his life was out of danger. Days later, Sylvia began to supply him with the medicine that the old man had given him, medicine that, by the way, the proto took with great pleasure, since according to him, it could help him develop his fire skills. After this, 2 years passed, and thanks to the fact that the boy continued training and ingesting the medicine, his skills had increased exponentially, and again 2 more years passed. The boy, in addition to spending time with his mother, did not leave his training for a single day, until he finally reached the age of 5 years. And this message appeared before him: you have achieved the 2nd level of fire. You have increased the quality of your soul. You have increased your sensitivity to mana. You have increased your energy. The boy was advancing little by little to reach and even surpass the level of power that he used to have. And it is explained to us that this window of state began to appear since he was just a child. At first, he did not understand very well how it worked, but then he understood that it was a system that allowed him to confirm his current state. And obviously it was only visible to him. However, despite the fact that his control over fire had improved, due to his physical condition he had not managed to improve the resistance of his body. Luckily, he was still 5 years old, so he had enough time to strengthen himself before he had to face his revenge, explaining to us that despite the fact that his physical condition was a problem, once he managed to master all the techniques such as assassin with which he used to count, that would not be a problem. Although before he could continue with his training, his mother prepared him to take him to a kind of meeting, or rather ceremony, where they would test the skills of the new members of his clan, and obviously Damon was one of them. Once in the place, he realized that the entire room was full of high-class people, but the latter seemed to treat his mother in a disrespectful way, and even murmured things about him and his illness, bragging that perhaps it was the fault of the blood of the loser that ran through his veins. Obviously, the prota did not understand very well what the hell they were referring to. And although he did not care that they spoke ill of him, if they continued insulting his mother, he would not be left with his arms crossed. But his mother reassured him, telling him not to pay attention to his comments, and that it was better to focus on the reason why they were in that place. After this, the patriarch of the family made himself present in the room, and realizing that all the guests were in the place, he used his power to invoke a huge sword, which according to Damon was called the Sword of Judgment, thus beginning the ceremony. After this, the patriarch explained to them that by placing his hand on the sword, this would determine the mana ability that each person possessed. So the first child was called for the test, and while he was subjecting himself to it, the prota explains to us that from the age of 4, the mana capacity of each child was stagnant, so that test would determine how strong they could become in the future, and what type of element they could master. The child from before obtained the attribute of wind. In addition to that, according to the subjecting himself to the exam was Lucy, a girl from a family allied to the Sigurds, who by the way obtained quite outstanding results. Meanwhile, the prota that still had ice energy in his circuit was sure that he would not get a too good result, although for the moment that did not matter too much. And well, after several aspirants his time came, Obviously, all the members of noble classes saw him with a lot of disdain, believing that he would not get an outstanding rating. Even the same demon did not have many expectations. He only hoped to find out what magical attribute best suited his new body. Although once he came into contact with the sword, he was surrounded by a bright intense aura, thanks to which he witnessed a kind of vision, in which a warrior faced hundreds of demons. Obviously, he did not understand who that guy was, unless what that place was. Yes, the guy seemed to have a great resemblance to the latter. Seconds later, he regained consciousness, realizing that in the test his energy did not even reach the middle of the sword, causing the mockery of all the people in the room, who apparently had never witnessed such a mediocre result. But despite the disappointment of the rest, his mother continued to support him. After this, Cedric ended the ceremony, inviting everyone to withdraw from his castle. The latter, despite that he already expected a pretty bad result from his grandson, he was quite disappointed by it. However, once everyone left the room, an immense burst of golden energy began to run through the Sword of Judgment. A light as golden as the sun, which according to Cedric was identical to that of the first patriarch, and which could only indicate an overwhelming firepower, capable of competing even with that of the demons, and that had only been seen a couple of times throughout the history of his family. Obviously, he could not understand how Damon had such potential. After this, they show us how 7 years have elapsed since the ceremony. Damon now had 12 years, and according to his window of state, he was about to reach level 3 in his domain about fire. Damon, title none, state, Curse of the Cold, little resistance, features none, Ring of Fire level 2. And the boy explains to us how during that period of time he continued with his constant training. Although he would have progressed much faster with fire if he did not have the energy of ice, in addition to the fact that thanks to the curse his resistance was still quite bad. But while he explained this to us, he was interrupted by his mother, who told him to hurry up, since the meeting was about to begin, this since according to the Prota, a second ceremony would be carried out at that time. Luckily this time the process was faster than the previous time. Although when his turn arrived, Cedric asked him why he had not responded to the request that they sent him a few days ago to attend the basic training. Although the Prota did not understand what the hell he was talking about, since apparently his mother had hidden it from him to protect him, so the latter asked his father to please exclude him from the training, since in his condition perhaps he could not resist them. But the guy replied that there were no exceptions for someone from the Seagart family, so if he could not accept his terms, the best thing was for him to leave at that time. After this, the fruit children in the room began to make fun of each other, remembering how he had already deserted his family once, and thanks to that Damon understood why his mother was treated that way, since apparently he had deserted his family some time ago, and by doing so he broke his mana core so as not to be sought. So now he could not use magic, all that to marry Damon's father, but the latter died during his pregnancy, leaving her with no alternative than to return to his family, which now saw her as useless. But despite the fact that he understood why they treated her that way, he was not willing to allow it. So after this, he presented himself to the patriarch, telling him that he would follow his orders and attend the blissful training. Although the challenging tone in which he said it aroused the fury of Cedric, who submitted the boy with an incredible aura that he was barely able to resist. But according to the Prota, it was something to be expected, since for some reason he was known as the King of Annihilation. His mother wanted to intercede for him, asking him to stop. However, the latter continued remitting with his aura against the boy. An aura so powerful that it even affected adults in the room. For his part, Damon, when he saw himself cornered, remembered how in his past life, being an assassin who moved among the shadows, he was always alone. However, now that he had someone to fight for, he could not leave so easily. After this, despite the intense aura of Cedric, the boy approached him to tell him that despite not being an official member of his family, he would present himself to the blissful camp and would show him that he was much more talented than the members of the upper class who claimed to be part of his family. After these words, he lost his knowledge due to the pressure. Yes, before collapsing, he remembered that just as in his past life, he was able to survive in the underworld. Becoming a figure from a family of privileged would not be a problem. He would show all the fruit children how strong he could become, someone who knew the taste of losing everything. On the other hand, they show us how one of the members of the main branch of the family had been interested in the Prota after seeing how he was able to resist the aura of his father. So he would keep him on guard to prevent him from becoming a threat to his right of succession. After this, they show us how Cedric visited the training ground where his grandson would be to meet with this guy here. Limer, the head instructor of the place and an old friend of his, The latter asked him if he was there for his grandson, explaining that Sylvia had visited him days before to ask him to make sure that Damon did not get injured, so he had arrived there for the same request. He was wasting time since he would make no distinction between his students, even if it was his grandson. Although he was shocked when the old man told him that that was just what he wanted, he was there to ask him that despite the condition of Damon, he would not decrease the intensity of his training, telling him that he would expel all those he considered weak, so that only those who could be useful would receive the appropriate resources. On the other hand, they show us how the Prota had reached the third level in his domain of fire. You have achieved the third level of fire. It has caused the increase in quality of your soul and your physique, increased resistance, strength, and agility, despite that he knew that that was only the beginning, since according to information from his past life, the training of the Yagarth was famous for its difficulty. So being level 3 was only the first step. He needed to continue improving if he wanted to survive and stand out more than anyone else, to shut up all those who made fun of him and his mother. After that, he would finally carry out his revenge, although while analyzing his statistics he was visited by his mother, who wanted to have a talk with him before he traveled to training. But before that, he asked him if he was sure he wanted to attend, since if he spoke to his father he could convince him to at least postpone it for a year. But the Prota refused, telling him that he could not stand how the nobles made fun of her. So Sylvia explained to him why she was treated that way, revealing that she had fallen in love with her father in the middle of a mission, but it was difficult to be with him, since he was only a normal gentleman. It was for that reason that he deactivated his mana core and abandoned his family. He also told him that he used to have a sister 2 years older than him, with whom he has a quite peaceful life. Or well, that is that several criminals assaulted them. His father was not so powerful and she was pregnant, so they could not do much against them. Luckily, his grandfather had hired guards without her knowing. Unfortunately, when they arrived, his father and sister had hung the tennis. After that, he had no choice but to return to the family of which he had once deserted. The Prota understands what happened, but as an assassin used to follow orders, he saw Sylvia as a selfish woman who had thrown away her responsibilities, despite that she was the only person who had treated him warmly. So he would use his skills not only to take revenge, but also to help her regain her position in the family. But hey, after spending a while next to Sylvia, he wanted to continue with his training. But when he did, an intense blue aura began to overwhelm him. It is finally the time. Your fury has reached me. After hearing these words, a kind of creature appeared before him, telling him that he would help him in his dream of revenge. Obviously, the boy did not understand what the hell was happening. Hidden trait is being unlocked. Anger trait has been created. After the message, the entity told him that he would help his dream of revenge come true. Yes, for this he would have to sacrifice both his body and his soul. However, he was quite surprised that his summoner was just a boy. So he asked him how someone his age was able to feel the necessary anger to invoke him. Although after taking a look he realized that indeed that boy had a huge thirst for revenge inside him. So he told him that if he gave him his body he would help him get the revenge he wanted so much. After hearing this, the Prota realized that perhaps that entity had been invoked by the anger he felt before losing his life. But now it was too late. So he told him that he did not need his help, since he would take revenge for his own means. But the creature in a threatening way explained to him that he had no choice. Since he was not there to negotiate, he was there to take control of his body. After this, a cold hugger began to run over the skin of Damon, who after the presence swung over him and tried to take control of his body, tried to resist. However, the demon did not seem to retreat, telling him that he would not stop until he had complete control of his new container, and in addition to the cold that was causing him, he even stimulated his feelings of anger so that he would give in to them and voluntarily give them control. And although it seemed tempting to him, the Prota could not give in, since he did not know what that monster could do to his mother after taking control of his body. Luckily, when the cold was about to take control of his body, he remembered something with which he could face him. So concentrating all his power, he generated a flame strong enough to prevent the ice from taking over his consciousness. That was the only option he had. The demon did not understand how a child of that age had the ability to resist his control, and the boy told him this: "I will take revenge on my own. I will not let a ghost use my body at will." Words that made the guy angry. Even so, he could not do anything, since his power was not enough to take control of the boy. Meanwhile, the system told the Prota that new abilities had been unlocked. Although the demon who observed everything realized that the system was the same as he had created, but he did not understand why he was in the hands of demon. So after hearing these words, the boy finally understood where that window came from. Meanwhile, the demon continued to exert power against the boy. Power that luckily was no longer effective against the latter, who had completely controlled the aura that he exerted against him. So noticing it, the demon made the decision that for the moment he would only remain by his side, that until he found the right time to take possession of his body. So he took the form of a small bracelet, telling him that he would be with him until the day of his elimination. Meanwhile, the Proto decided not to try to get rid of him, since in case of getting it, he would lose the system that had been helping him, that if he would keep him watched until he was strong enough to get rid of him. The next day the boy said goodbye to both his mother and his maid, since his trip to the training camp was about to begin. After saying goodbye to both of them, they show us that a week later, the boy finally arrived at the Happy Camp, where by the way not only members of the Ziggert family would attend, but also members of the secondary branches and allied families. As always, several boys spoke badly behind the Proto, making fun of how fragile his body was. And because most likely it was that he did not even pass the admission test, but the Proto presented himself to them, to tell them that if they had something to comment on, they told him face to face. The boys on their part asked him how someone who lived in exile dared to talk to them that way, to which the boy replied that failures of the secondary branches were worse than him. After this, the boys turned against him, but Damon was ready to answer his attacks. However, they were arrested by Hart, one of the members of the main branch, who immediately put the boys in his place, although after asking them to leave, he asked the Proto if he did not know his place, since he was nothing more than garbage in his family, so he had to behave as such, and not embarrass them. But Damon answered him in an epic way, that what was he going to do if he did not obey him? If he would run to his father's arms to ask him to kick him out, since he was sure that on his own he could not do anything against him. This made the boy angry that he was about to attack him. However, they were interrupted by the instructor from before. Noticing his presence, the Proto realized that it was someone he had heard in his previous life, a powerful warrior who had retired after his core was damaged. The latter, after introducing himself, explained that since this year there were too many recruits, he would apply a test to reduce his number to half, since he could not waste his time with people without potential, explaining to them that the first test would be to run until he told them to stop. After this, all the boys began to run as fast as they could. On the other hand, the demon asked Damon why he was not in a hurry, to which the boy replied that it was not a race, rather it was a battle of resistance. So he had to dissipate his energy, since the winner would be the last person standing and he would reach the end. No matter what happened, the two geniuses of the main branches took the lead immediately, and despite their speed, they did not seem tired at all. While Damon, despite having stayed behind everyone, his physical condition was quite regrettable. As soon as he stood up, most of the students made fun of him for his condition, since despite being so arrogant he could not back up his words with facts. Although Damon, despite his physical condition, mentally he was in the best way, since for him that was a training of children, while in his past life he had had to escape from beasts that tried to devour him. So for no reason he would stop. The hours continued to pass and many applicants had given up, but the instructor could not believe how Damon was able to stand up in his current state, wondering how a child had a mentality that only the people who had trained to the brink of death possessed, something that seemed quite interesting to him. The boy from before, who did not understand how the pro was able to stand up, despite his affection, he used his aura to prevent Damon from reaching him, but the latter did not pay attention to him and kept his rhythm. Hours later, only a few students continued running, among them of course Damon, who had been using his fire to stay conscious, but the demon in his bracelet wanted to use that opportunity to take possession of his body, using his ice to take him to the brink of collapse. Moments later, they show us how only a couple of students had completed the test, among them Damon, who did not give up until the end. Obviously, the demon did not understand how he was able to stay conscious. After this, the examiner gave the results of the tests, explaining that no one would be expelled, at least for the moment, that yes, of having fulfilled his word, everyone would have been eliminated, some for not resisting the test, and many others for using their work to increase their speed. The only one who had been able to comply with the test at the foot of the letter was Damon, while everyone had failed and well, once with the test finished, the pro, despite having obtained quite satisfactory results, immediately started walking to the gym to continue carrying out his workouts, something that even surprised the demon, who could not believe how he could have with that resistance. Meanwhile, some recruits were wondering how the hell the Proto had been able to pass the previous test in that way. After all, according to the rumors that they had heard, the guy was quite sick, so it was not possible that he had a resistance like the one he showed, and in the end, they came to the conclusion that perhaps he had used some kind of potency potion to pass the test. After all, he had contacts with members of the direct branch. So without hesitation, they presented themselves to him to confront him, asking him to admit to the teacher from before, having used substances out of the rules to improve his skills, since if he did not, they would make him pay very dearly for having deceived everyone. Although obviously the Prota for no reason planned to follow his orders, and as soon as one of the guys threw the first blow at him, the latter hesitated to evade it and counterattack. Obviously the other recruits could not believe what they saw, although the Prota did not stop there, since he continued to connect several blows to him until he made him kiss the ground, asking the others not to repress themselves and attack him, since otherwise he would go for them. The rest of the recruits swung at him, but as expected, little and nothing could be done against the boy, who only needed a couple of minutes to completely destroy them. The difference between his combat skills was abysmal, and for the Prota they represented nothing more than simple insects. After this, the boy from before approached to question him if he had been sent by someone, and after verifying that he did not, he told him that if he dared to cross his path again, next time he would not be so kind and would break some bones for him to learn the lesson. By the way, the whole scene between these boys had been witnessed by the instructor from before, who had realized that the Prota had more talent than he expected. Despite not yet having aura, his skills were exceptional, so he decided that from that moment on he would keep an eye on him. By the way, we see how he does the event from before. The Prota had obtained a few improvements in his statistics, which obviously made the demon furious, who could not believe how fast that boy was improving. So he had to hurry to take control of his body, or otherwise that task would become impossible. That is why he decided to make a bet on the Prota, proposing that in case the first 5 recruits were left in the test that would be carried out at the end of the camp, he would personally take care of the rewards of the system to be duplicated, and the benefits that he would obtain were much higher, of course. In case they failed that mission, he would have to accept that the domain that the demon exercised over him would increase by 10%, something that represented a danger for the Prota, since the chances that his body was stolen would increase drastically. However, to the surprise of the demon, the boy accepted without hesitation, since for him the offer that he was proposing was too tempting to let him escape. In addition to the fact that he was sure that he would be number 1 in the test, IRA has suggested a bet, conditioned to approve as superior apprentice to the training test. In case of success, all the statistics will be multiplied, but in case of failure, IRA's anger will increase by 10%. You have accepted IRA's bet, and well, with this agreement signed, the recruits continued to carry out their training, being guided by the instructor from before. However, they all seemed quite disappointed, since according to them, instead of training useful things such as the scrimmage, he simply pressured them by carrying out quite simple physical training. But unlike them, who barely finished the class, used their free time to practice skillful movements with their sword, our Prota used that time differently. After all, he knew that focusing on it, having such a weak body, would only be a waste of time. So he preferred to focus on basic training to improve both his strength and his resistance. By the way, while the Prota was subjected to hard training, he had been being closely observed by the girl from before, who seemed quite interested in him, and wondered how the hell the Prota was able to improve so quickly, since every day that passed, he was able to bear more weight than the previous one, something that not many were able to achieve, no matter how focused they were in training. So out of curiosity, he approached the latter to ask him why he was so focused on it, instead of focusing on the scrimmage as the rest of the recruits were doing. Obviously, the Prota did not understand why that girl wanted to approach him, so he simply decided not to pay attention. What he did not expect was that the latter decided to watch him more closely, this since when approaching him, he could feel a quite comforting aura that until now he had not felt with any other person. So despite the fact that the Prota was trying not to pay him attention, the girl began to carry out all the training that the Prota carried out. After all, she was very interested in him. By the way, the rest of the recruits who had noticed how the girl had begun to be quite close to the Prota wondered why, since they did not explain how someone from the main branch could be interested in someone like the Prota, who barely belonged to the secondary branches of the family. Meanwhile, Hart wondered why the Prota was so committed to carrying out basic training, instead of focusing on his handling of the sword, since no matter how strong he was, if he was not able to defend himself in battle, so much effort would be practically useless. But in the end, he decided not to pay more attention to him. By the way, we see how other recruits like this boy from here, Ryan, had put his attention in the way in which the Prota trained, focusing on the basics, Instead of jumping to more complicated and difficult training to carry out, that is why he asked for his permission to train with him. Since he wanted to start by improving his basic skills, of course, he did not ask him to do it for free, since in exchange for allowing him to train with him, he would give him his daily dessert until the day of the blessed test arrived. Obviously, the Proto, who did not mind the idea that someone was following in his footsteps, had no problem accepting it and even gave the blessed dessert to Lucy, who seemed more interested in it than Damon himself. And well, with this decided, the three became training partners, carrying out exercises to improve their skills on a daily basis. While the weeks continued to pass and the day of the test was getting closer and closer, meanwhile Hart and the rest of the recruits continued to waste time focusing only on improving their handling on the sword. And well, in the end, the 6 months of waiting passed, and the day of the blessed test finally arrived. As expected, the parents of all the recruits attended the ceremony to witness the performance of their children. By the way, the demon who accompanied the Proto was quite confident that he would win the bet, since thanks to his calculations he was sure that Damon had not been able to surpass the other two prodigies in terms of talent. However, the Proto told him to calm down and simply enjoy the show. By the way, among the public was the mother of the Proto, who was eager to witness how much her son had grown during training. Although of course she was not the only one, since the patriarch himself was present at the event, leaving many surprised. This since it was the first time in many years that the guy was bothered to witness the first tests of the recruits. And well, once with all the public in their seats, the instructor from before proceeded to explain the instructions of the test, as well as the parameters that he would use to qualify the skills of each recruit, telling them that to overcome said test, they simply had to be able to withstand the pressure exerted by their aura. In other words, it was a test of resistance, both physical and spiritual, and not a test of aptitude with the sword that many recruits had believed. However, once he gave the explanation of the test, many parents of the recruits did not quite agree, since according to these, the boys had not been training Laura for a long time, so not everyone could use it to withstand the pressure. However, the instructor replied that in fact it was quite the opposite. In said test, Laura's use would be strictly prohibited. Instead, the recruits would have to be able to withstand it, using nothing more than their own resistance to their body, as well as their mental resistance, which would be fundamental to overcome the test. And of course, in that way no recruit would have any advantage as Laura was. And well, once he finished clarifying everything, the instructor started the test, and the first to be called was Lucy. Obviously, all those who observed her evaluation had high expectations about her result, since as you will remember, she was the one who had obtained the best results in the test a few years ago. By the way, the instructor explains to us that he would use different types of pressure on each recruit according to the potential he had demonstrated and the effort he had put in during the training camp. For that very reason, knowing the immense potential with which the girl counted, he put quite a lot of pressure on her, of course, enough to affect her. But as for the latter to be able to pass, and of course, as was to be expected, despite the fact that the pressure was so great that it could even affect some experienced adults, the latter managed to pass without much problem, just as the instructor expected. So do not hesitate to congratulate her, since she was aware of all the training that she had been carrying out with the pro in the last few days. But hey, the next recruit to be called was Ryan, who in fact was quite nervous about the test, and despite his training, he did not even expect to get a decent result. However, the instructor, who noticed this before submitting him to his aura, advised him not to worry so much and simply use his will to resist. After this, he proceeded to use his aura against him, of course, this time adjusting his power so that he was able to overcome it, and in the end, thanks to all the training that he had carried out in the last few months with the pro, he was able to pass the test. By the way, while this was happening, the pro was able to notice how the instructor was abusing different pressure levels in each student he evaluated. But hey, once Ryan's evaluation was over, the elf, in addition to congratulating him, advised him to have more confidence in himself, since unlike what he believed, he had quite a lot of potential. And well, after this, several aspirants continued to submit to the blessed test, and in fact the vast majority was failing in it, since following Hart's steps, they focused on improving their eskrima, and completely disrupted their physical training. But hey, after a while it was finally Hart's time, to whom the instructor, knowing of his enormous potential, subjected him to quite a great pressure, superior to that of all the students who had passed until that moment. As expected, this last one hardly was able to stand up, since despite having enormous potential, even being able to use the aura, his resistance was quite deficient. It was then when the elf told him that perhaps his potential did not have a rival in that camp, but he could not depend only on his aura, and like the others, he had to focus on basic training. In fact, if he had done it at that time, he would not be having so many problems with the test. As simple as that. It was then when the boy finally began to realize all the mistakes he had made until that moment. However, he knew that he could not give up in that place, or otherwise he would be finished. So in the end, thanks to his enormous talent, and after a lot of effort, he managed to pass the test, since he knew what would happen to his father in case he failed. But hey, leaving all that aside, the turn of our Plota finally arrived. In fact, he was the last recruit to submit to the test. What he did not expect was that once he approached the instructor, the Son of Fruit, he released a burst of his huge aura, much higher than the one he had used during the rest of the evaluations. The pressure generated by the guy was so monstrous that it even affected the spectators who witnessed the test. Even the Patriarch wondered why the instructor used so much power as one of the worst recruits. What no one expected was that the Plota did not seem too affected by that power, since it is explained to us that at that time, despite the fact that the resistance of his body was not very great, the resistance of his soul was quite the opposite, since he continued to maintain the strength of his old self as authorizing. That is why that amount of aura did not represent a problem for him, and without much difficulty the instructor approached to ask him if that was all, a scene that not only left the latter shocked, but also the Patriarch who observed the whole scene. Everyone in the public wondered who the hell was that boy, and how he was able to withstand such a terrifying aura. The worst of all was that he was acting as if he were in a playground. And well, after everyone was amazed at the ability of the Plota, the instructor approached him quite impressed to ask him who the hell was he and how he had been able to withstand that amount of pressure, to which the Plota in a calm tone simply replied that he was Damon, a recruit like any other. It was then when the instructor asked him again how he had achieved that resistance, if he had been observing his training at all times. To which the Plota replied that who the hell told him that he was abusing all his potential in the blessed training. He had simply seen what the Plota wanted him to see. By the way, the instructor explains to us that the amount of aura he used at the beginning was simply to annoy him a little, since no one his age had the strength to resist something like that, and after scaring him he planned to reduce the pressure to a level that he could resist, but in the end that was not necessary. But hey, the instructor finally gave the aptitude test, commenting to the public that at that moment he would announce who was the most promising recruit in the entire camp. However, his words left both the relatives and the public and the same recruits shocked, since the happy recruit was none other than our Plota, who had passed the exam with increases. However, at that moment he was interrupted by Hart, who asked him how the hell he dared to say that. After all, it could not be possible that that boy, unable to use the aura, was above him, telling him that it was most likely that he had used some kind of trick to submit to that amount of pressure. As expected, his words raised suspicions of the people in the public, who began to get the idea that it was most likely that the Plota had done some kind of trap, since it was not possible that someone with such a powerful curse, as with which that boy had been born, had such great resistance. On the other hand, the Son of Fruit of Heart told the instructor that the best way to decide who was the best recruit in the camp was to leave him in a one-on-one combat. However, the instructor replied that the test had already finished, although before completely rejecting his proposal, he consulted the Patriarch what they should do in that case, to which the latter decided to ask the Plota his opinion, and if he agreed to carry out a duel, to decide who was the best. What he did not expect was that the Plota replied that no. After all the test had finished and the results were clear, in addition he would not get any benefit for submitting to the test, and well, after hearing his proposal, the decision of the Plota changed, since it is not explained that obtaining a plate was already bronze, gold, or silver within an important family. It was equivalent to being able to request a favor of that level of importance. So if he was able to obtain one of these blessed plates, he could take great advantage of it in the future. So he quickly accepted his proposal, and well, with the blessed duel decided, the instructor explained to them what the rules of the game were. The duel would be decided only with a round, and they would be disqualified in case of using the aura or some type of weapon, since in that way, both would be in equal conditions, and well, once with the starting signal, Hart did not hesitate to attack Damon. What he did not expect was that the Plota, without major problem, was being able to dodge all his attacks, maintaining a certain distance, after which Hart began to use one of the best combat techniques passed from generation to generation within his family, something that amazed everyone in the public, who could not believe that a child of that age already had a technique like that. However, the boy seemed quite worried, since until that moment for more impacts that he continued to launch, none was able to connect, and Damon, and fatigue little by little began to pass him bill, while the Plota continued as calm as possible. For his part, we see how the latter, all that time, had been focusing his energy on reading the movements and the energy flow of that boy, and once he managed to assimilate them completely, he decided to give him a spoonful of his own medicine, copying the famous combat technique that the boy boasted so much about, and with which a single hook was enough to send him to sleep. Of course, he did not stop there, and continued to launch several more blows to give the guy a good lesson and show him what his place was, right at his feet, while in the public no one, including the patriarch, could believe what had just happened. That boy, whom everyone considered practically garbage, had been able to use a technique of the Sigart family. After his defeat, Hart asked the boy how the hell he had been able to learn that technique, to which the Plota simply replied that in fact, it was he who taught him, while he only limited himself to replicating his movements, while the instructor was increasingly more impacted with the skills of the Plota. Since he was able to ride as during the meeting, that boy had been able to observe and assimilate the movements of his opponent until he stole his own technique, and in fact use it in a better way than Hart himself. If that boy had trained and polished properly, he could become the talent that the Sigart family had been looking for so much in recent generations. But hey, I would leave that for later, and at that moment he limited himself to recognize in front of the public the best recruit of the camp, reaffirming as the only winner to Daemont. Obviously his mother was the most proud of that result, running immediately to him to congratulate him for how much he had grown in the last few months. But hey, leaving all that aside, we see how after the whole ceremony was over, Hart appeared before his father to apologize for what happened and for not having obtained the first place during the test as he asked. Although as expected the latter was furious, not only had he been surpassed by the foreign girl, referring to Lucy, but also by a loser in the secondary family like the Prota, asking him if he wanted to be banished and sent to the secondary branches of the family, as had happened with his brothers. Although in the end he decided to give him another opportunity, telling him to make sure he was chosen as the best recruit. After the external incursions began to be carried out, of course, in case of failure there would be no second chances, and well, after all the sermon, as was to be expected, Hart was furious with the Prota, since if it had not been for him, he would have won the Best Recruit award and he would not have had to go through what happened before with his father. However, while he was thinking about all this, he went to the recruitment training room to try to train for a while and clear his mind a little. Although while he was in the facilities, he wanted to take a look at the Prota's locker room, trying to find a clue as to why he had improved so quickly as he did. Although in the end what he found inside the happy locker room left him cold. In it there were dozens of pairs of shoes totally worn out because of having used them too much, and after finding them the boy began to understand why the Prota had improved as he did. Since during that time he had barely changed his shoes twice, and they were not even so worn out, that made him understand all the work that the Prota had put into his training to improve his physical capacity. In the end, the one who had actually made an effort was the Prota, and not him as he had believed all this time. So after leaving the facilities, he came to the conclusion that the best thing was to stop focusing on defeating Daemont and put all his effort in improving his skills. Otherwise, at the end of the next test, the result would be the same, and again the Prota would leave him far behind. But hey, on the other hand, we see how the Prota was claiming his rewards after winning the bet to the devil. Obviously, the latter could not believe that this boy had really won him. According to him, he had exceeded his expectations, since with such a weak body with which he possessed, the only way to balance the balance with the rest of the recruits was by having a lot of experience, and it was not explained where a child could have taken it. But hey, the rewards that the Prota obtained were the following. You have won a bet against anger. The reward will be given to the winner. All the points of skill are increased by 2. A random special trait of those who possess anger will be created. The special trait is perception, and well, after the system indicated this to him, the devil explained to him that he was quite lucky, since he had had a fairly useful skill of his arsenal, which allowed him to detect any type of danger that approached a certain radius of distance, and in that way he could react to him. But leaving that aside, the next day Daemont received the visit of one of the Patriarch's mayors, since the latter wanted to immediately fulfill his part of the deal and give him the famous bronze plate that he promised him. And well, once the Prota was in front of the blessed Patriarch, the latter gave him the blessed plate, telling him that he could ask him for any favor equivalent to the value of that object. However, before he could finish, the Prota asked him something. What did he have to do to return to his mother the position that he had before within his family? Obviously, the old man was shocked with the seriousness with which the Prota questioned him. So he replied that if he wanted to get that, he simply had to obtain achievements good enough to obtain that reward. However, it was not as simple as it sounded, since among his family, often talented members met. So he had to get something important enough to stand out among others. And for this, the possibilities were minimal. But hey, after hearing his answer, the Prota returned the plate, thanking him for having resolved his doubt. Although before the Prota retired from the room, he was arrested by the Patriarch, who told him that that question was not equivalent to the value of the plate, so he could keep it, and ask for something that would be useful to him. And this surprised the Prota, who began to believe that this old man was not as hard as he had heard, and of course, he did not plan to waste an opportunity like that. So he quickly asked him to grant him a mana refinement technique, more powerful than the one they used to teach in the academy. This since the Prota explains to us that if he wanted to obtain a power strong enough to seek revenge against the guys who eliminated him in his past life, it was not enough to learn the same techniques as a Zazen that he already knew. For this he needed something much stronger, and of course, that would help him achieve the blessed achievements that he needed. And well, his words left the Patriarch, but still he did not dare to correspond to his request, taking him to a kind of room full of books, telling him that each one of them had a different technique, so he could choose any of them as his reward, to which the Prota did not dare to do, however. After using his mana to choose the one that most caught his attention, both the mayor and the Patriarch were cold. After all, that book kept one of the most important techniques of his family, the cultivation of 10,000 flames, and in fact in several decades nobody had been able to open that book, since apparently he chose the bearers who were worthy of knowing its content. So they could not believe that that boy would have been able to open it as if nothing. By the way, while he was fascinated with the potential of Damon, the Patriarch explains to us why he treated the boy's mother that way, and it turns out that those responsible for the elimination of the Prota's father were his enemies. So he blamed himself that his daughter had gone through it. For the latter, he tried to keep the main branches of the family away, to keep her away from the danger that threw them away. But hey, leaving that aside, let's go with the Prota. He had completely assimilated the technique that was inside the blessed book, leaving the Patriarch shocked that he could not believe that he would have been able to understand the content of the parchment. Although after that he told him that he could retire, since he had obtained something of an equivalent value to the blessed bronze plate, cultivation of 10,000 flames. You have met with the flames of eternity. The cultivation of 10,000 flames has been remembered, and well, we see how after the Prota retired from the facilities, the mayor questioned the Patriarch if it was okay for a child of that age to know a skill as powerful as that, since in case others found out about it, they would not hesitate to go after him. However, the old man replied that there was no problem. After all, very few had knowledge of the existence of that technique, which in fact had been used only by the founding member of his family, and despite the fact that many tried to master it, after him no one got it, and in the end that technique ended up becoming a simple myth. But hey, in the meantime we had with the Prota. As soon as he returned to his residence, he did not waste time and immediately began to practice it at the basis of the new technique that he now had knowledge of. However, despite the fact that he was shocked by the amount of immense energy that he was able to gather thanks to it, he was taking a lot of work to control it. After all, in his past life, he had never practiced a technique based on fire, since his specialty was the dark magic techniques. By the way, while he was training, he was interrupted by the demon, who advised him to practice when he was sure he was completely alone, since if he was interrupted by someone while he was in the middle of the trance, the magic circuit of his body would collapse, and he would end up being unconscious probably for the rest of his life. Obviously, the Prota already had knowledge of this, so he did not want to take him in the opposite, since if he had bad luck, he could end up being interrupted by his mother. Also at that moment, he had something more important in which to focus his attention, telling us that he had discovered that one of the maids apparently was a spy who had been leaking information from his family, and as always he was right, since we see how this last one at that time was creating a report for the person he was working for, and in which he gave details about how Damon had obtained a rare cultivation ability in exchange for the bronze plate, in addition to the fact that it must be a fairly powerful ability, since the energy that emanated while he was assimilating it was monstrous. Although what this last one did not expect was that just before sending the blessed report, he was intercepted by the Prota, who had been moving in the shadows. Of course, after doing so, he advised him not to open his mouth and not even think about escaping. Otherwise, he would end his life in an instant. By the way, the girl was shocked after realizing that the person who commanded such a monstrous bloodthirst was none other than Damon himself. wondering how the hell he had noticed her, and at all times he tried to keep a proper distance on the part of the Proto without having time to react. He introduced a girl a kind of seed that he had been saving for an occasion like that, and after that he began to ask her several questions until he found out who was behind her, something that in fact did not take him much work. Discovering that he was responsible, he was the fruit son of Heart's father. On the part of the girl, it was not explained how the Proto was able to obtain all the answers he wanted, until he came to the conclusion that the seed that he had introduced in his mouth was nothing more than a worm of fury, a kind of mania that forced his victims to tell the truth. But hey, after this, the girl gave him more details about her mission, about how she had been sent to her residence by orders of Heart's father, who asked me to collect all kinds of information about him and his mother, of course keeping a low profile, and although at first she had believed that it was a fairly simple mission, she did not expect to run into a monster like Damon. So asking him to spare her life, he told her that he would change the content of the report so that all the information about him remained hidden. However, the Proto replied that he was willing to forgive her, and for that it was not even necessary to change the content of the report, since that could become suspicious for the Fruit Son. Instead, he would continue to send the information about him as until now, of course after he himself was censured of the content of the reports, but in addition to that he would have to give the information about the Fruit Son of his boss, becoming a kind of double agent, and well before retiring he told her that he was waiting for the next time he returned to his residence to have useful information from him, since otherwise perhaps he could change his mind and end her. And well, after all this event a few weeks later the boy said goodbye to his mother to return to the camp, since unfortunately his vacations had come to an end. By the way, once back in the camp facilities he realized that only 42 students had returned, since the vast majority had failed in the last exam, obtaining quite mediocre grades, and apparently the instructor kept his word, since less than half of the students had managed to pass. By the way, as soon as he arrived at the place, Lucy approached him in a very kind way, very different from how she used to behave with him, and they explained to us that this was because the girl, after returning, Chris told his parents all the help he had received from Daemont. However, he had not been able to thank him, since he followed the orders of not talking to any boy. Obviously, this impressed his parents, who told him that he should not take everything so literally, and if someone offered him help for basic courtesy, he should thank him. So going back to the present, once he was in front of Daemont, he did not hesitate to thank her for everything he had done for her in the last months. Obviously, this left the Proto shocked that he did not understand why the girl who had always behaved like a robot now related to him in a friendly way. By the way, she was not the only one to thank him, since the boy from before also approached him to thank him, commenting that if it had not been for him and his training, it was most likely that he would have been expelled like the rest of the recruits. Although what surprised Daemont the most was that Hart approached him, but this time he was not looking for problems. Rather, he apologized to him for the way in which he had been treating him in recent months, also for having made a fuss in the last ceremony, telling him that he recognized all the effort he had put into improving his skills, so he hoped that this time they could have a worthy battle in the race to become the best recruit in the camp. As expected, the Proto could not believe how much that boy had grown, since he did not expect him to be able to change so much after the humiliation for which he had made him pass. But hey, after this, the instructor finally made an act of presence, telling them that they had to prepare, since from that moment on the training would be much harder. However, when he was about to give the alignment of the following tests, he was interrupted by this girl from here, Martha Seagard, a member of the main branches of the family, who from that moment on would begin to train with them. However, when the instructor tried to present her in front of everyone, he was interrupted by the latter, who asked the recruit number 1 of the group, who had a sparring practice just at that moment against her. And well, for his part, the Proto did not hesitate to present himself as the best recruit of the camp, asking him what was the need to face him, to which the girl told him that he could not allow anyone to be considered better than her being in a group, so he planned to defeat him and take possession of his title. However, at that moment he was interrupted by Hart, who asked him to behave according to his level and stop causing a ruckus. After all, this guy had been recognized by the patriarch himself of the family as the best recruit, not only of that camp but of the entire generation. Of course, the latter was not the only one to intervene, since Lucy also got in his way, preventing him from being able to approach Damon. For his part, the girl could not believe that 2 members of the main branch were defending Scoria from the secondary branches, but in the end he decided to withdraw for the moment, or well, that was what made them believe, since as soon as they lowered the guard, he attacked Damon, trying to knock him out with a blow. What I did not expect was that the latter managed to react in time, and not only evade his attack without any problem, but even send him to fly with a hook straight to the liver. Obviously, the girl could not believe that this boy had such sharp eyes. Even so, she was furious about what happened. So she planned to destroy him using her aura, but at that moment she was interrupted by the instructor who told her that it was enough. Damon had proven to be better than her, so he would continue to maintain the title as the best student, and if he wanted to prove his worth so much that he would do it in the next exam. By the way, the demon was furious with the girl for the way he treated the protagonist, asking Damon why he did not cause him more damage in the blow before instead of containing himself as he did, to which the protagonist replied that he did not consider that necessary. After all, it was enough to humiliate her in the following tests. But hey, leaving aside the whole incident, the training began, and like the previous months, the protagonist stood out from the rest of the recruits. Even Hart now recognized that the boy was a true prodigy. The way he mastered the art of the sword was monstrous. It practically seemed as if he had been stabbing her in the battlefield for years. By the way, the latter was not the only one impacted with her, since we see how Martha could not believe that her sword skills were inferior to that boy's. She could accept losing against Hart or Lucy, members of the main branches, but she would never accept that garbage like the protagonist was above her. By the way, they reveal to us a little about the origin of the girl. It turns out that she belonged to an allied family of the Sea Guards, but thanks to showing a monstrous talent from a very young age, she was adopted by a member of the main branch of the latter to make her a possible patriarchal candidate of the family. But going back to the present, we see how his butler told him that he should not worry so much about the talent of Damon, since even if he was a prodigy in terms of body-to-body combat and the handling of the sword, he was still unable to use the aura, unlike her, who was an expert in that. And well, we see how the next day, after observing the polished way in which the butler handled the sword, the vast majority of the recruits approached him asking for his advice. But while they were doing it, they were interrupted by Martha, who in a mocking tone told him that she was impressed with her ability in the sword, which surpassed hers by a lot. However, that would be of no use to her if she was not able to use the mana, and most likely it was that luckily she would end up being a simple skirmish instructor. For her part, Lucy, furious with the words of the girl, approached her to ask her to withdraw, or seriously she would have problems, to which the girl agreed. After all, now she knew that the butler did not represent an obstacle for her. By the way, the furious demon for what happened coincided with the butler because he had not done anything to put in his place the daughter of fruit from before, to which the butler replied that his words did not interest him. In fact, he was so immersed in his training that he did not even pay attention to Martha, whom he considered no more than a simple insect. He even told the demon that at that time he was focusing all his attention on learning the skirmish techniques of the Sigurd family, since the only ones he knew how to use at that time were assaying techniques, with which he finished off his opponents from the shadows. By the way, we see how Lucy approached him with some gifts to comfort him after the incident of before, since apparently he had begun to develop romantic feelings towards him. But leaving that aside, a week later the butler returned to his residence to collect the information that the maid had obtained from Hart's father.